The rain fell like bullets against the asphalt, each drop exploding into 1,000 fragments that mirrored the chaos in my chest. 11:47 p.m., and Boston's streets gleamed black under the amber streetlights. The scent of wet concrete and exhaust fumes clung to the air as I hurried through the hospital's staff exit, my sneakers squeaking against the slick pavement. 12 hours. That's how long I'd been on my feet in the pediatric ward, watching over tiny patients who deserved so much better than what life had dealt them. My scrubs clung to my tired body, the pale blue fabric darkened with sweat, and the occasional splash of juice from a toddler who'd finally smiled after 3 days of fever. These moments made everything worth it. Almost everything. My keys jingled in my trembling fingers as I approached my beaten Honda Civic, parked under the flickering fluorescent light of the staff parking garage. The metal was cold and wet beneath my palm when I reached for the handle, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing off the concrete walls. My blood turned to ice water. Isabella, his voice cut through the rain like a blade, low and gravelly from too much whiskey and too many cigarettes. I didn't need to turn around to know who stood behind me. Derek Morrison, my ex-boyfriend, my nightmare, the man I'd spent the last 6 months trying to forget. I turned slowly, my back pressed against the car door. He emerged from the shadows between 2 parked vehicles, his police uniform wrinkled and stained, badge catching the overhead light. At 29, Derek had the kind of rugged features that used to make my heart race. Now they just made my skin crawl. Dirty blonde hair hung across his forehead, and his brown eyes held that familiar glint of anger and something darker. Something hungry. "You've been avoiding my calls." His words slurred slightly, and the smell of alcohol hit me from 6 feet away. "We broke up, Derek. 6 months ago. Remember?" I clutched my keys between my fingers, the metal edges pressing into my palm. "You don't get to call anymore." He stepped closer, and I caught sight of the fresh scratches on his knuckles. Someone had fought back recently. That someone probably hadn't been as lucky as I was right now. "See? That's where you're wrong, baby." The pet name dripped with possession and threat. "We're not done. We'll never be done." Rain plastered his hair to his skull as he moved closer, backing me against the car. I could see the moisture gathering on his uniform, hear the squish of his boots on the wet concrete. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was certain he could hear it. "I know you've been working extra shifts," he continued, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that made my skin crawl. "Trying to pay for that old woman's medical bills. Your mama, right? Sweet Sophia in the memory care unit." My mother's name on his lips felt like a violation. "Stay away from her." "Or what?" He laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "You'll call the cops?" "I am the cops, sweetheart." The overhead light flickered again, casting his face in alternating moments of harsh illumination and shadow. In the brief darkness, he moved closer. Close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the red veins threading through his eyes. "I've been patient, Bella. Real patient. But my patience is running thin." I pressed harder against the car, the door handle digging into my spine. "Derek, you're drunk. Go home. Sleep it off." "Home?" He barked out a laugh that echoed off the concrete walls. "You think I have a home? You think any of us have homes anymore?" Something in his voice changed, became desperate, frantic. This wasn't just about us anymore. Something else was driving him, something that made him even more dangerous than before. "I owe people money, Bella. Bad people. The kind who don't care about badges or uniforms or anything except getting what they're owed." His hand reached out, fingers grazing my cheek. "But you could fix all that." I jerked away from his touch, adrenaline flooding my system. "I don't have any money. You know that. You don't need money." His smile was all teeth and predatory hunger. "You just need to come with me. Tonight." That's when I ran. I pushed past him with all the strength I had, my shoulder slamming into his chest. He stumbled backward, caught off guard by the sudden movement, giving me precious seconds to bolt toward the garage exit. My feet pounded against the wet pavement as I heard him cursing behind me, his heavier footsteps echoing as he gave chase. The rain hit me like a wall of ice as I burst from the parking garage onto the street. My scrubs provided no protection against the October chill, and within seconds I was soaked through, but I didn't stop running. Couldn't stop. Because I knew Derek. and I knew that if he caught me tonight, I might not see tomorrow. The old part of Boston stretched ahead of me, all narrow streets and shadowy alleyways. Historic buildings loomed on either side, their brick facades gleaming wetly in the streetlight. My lungs burned as I sprinted down Washington Street, past closed shops and empty sidewalks. The sound of Derek's pursuit had faded, but I didn't trust it. Didn't trust anything anymore. I ducked into an alley between two buildings, pressing my back against the cold brick wall, trying to catch my breath. Rain streamed down my face, mixing with tears I didn't remember shedding. My red hair hung in wet tangles around my shoulders, and I could taste copper in my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. That's when I heard the voices. Male. Rough. Getting closer. She went this way. Check the alley. Boss ain't gonna be happy if we don't find her. My blood turned to slush. These weren't Derek's voices. These were new threats. Unknown dangers in a night that had already gone from bad to catastrophic. I crept deeper into the shadows, my sneakers silent on the wet pavement. Through the rain, I caught sight of movement at the mouth of the alley. Two men in dark clothing, their faces hidden in the shadows. One pointed in my direction, and I knew I had seconds before they spotted me. I bolted, back onto the main street, past a closed bookstore and a shuttered cafe, my feet slipping on the slick sidewalk. The sound of pursuit echoed behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Ahead, warm light spilled from the windows of an upscale Italian restaurant, its elegant facade a stark contrast to the chaos in my chest. And that's when I saw him, tall, imposing, a figure in an expensive charcoal suit emerging from the restaurant's entrance, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the rain. He moved with the kind of confidence that suggested he'd never run from anything in his life. I didn't think, couldn't think. Desperation made the choice for me. I grabbed his hand. His skin was warm against my freezing fingers, and I felt him tense at the unexpected contact. Up close, he was even more intimidating than I'd first thought. At least 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to block out the streetlight behind him. His eyes were the color of winter storms, pale blue-gray and sharp enough to cut glass. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rain. "Help me." For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Just studied my face with those penetrating eyes, taking in my soaked scrubs, my terrified expression, the way I clung to his hand like a lifeline. Then Derek's voice cut through the night. "Bella, get back here." The stranger's gaze flicked past me to where Derek stood at the end of the block, rain-soaked and furious. Then his attention returned to me, and something shifted in his expression. Something dangerous and protective all at once. "Who hurt you?" His voice was low, controlled, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place. Before I could answer, two men in dark suits materialized from the shadows behind him. They moved like ghosts, silent and deadly, flanking us without a sound. Derek took one look at them and stopped dead in his tracks. The stranger squeezed my hand once, gently, and I felt something pass between us. A promise, maybe, or a warning. "You're safe now," he said simply, and for the first time in months I almost believed it. The silence stretched between us like pulled wire as Derek retreated into the rain-soaked darkness. My hand remained locked in the stranger's grip, his warmth anchoring me to reality while my world tilted sideways. Water dripped from my hair onto the expensive fabric of his suit, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "Vincent," he said quietly, and one of the men in dark suits stepped forward. "Follow him. Quietly. I want to know where he goes, who he calls, what he's planning." Vincent nodded once and melted back into the shadows, moving with a predator's grace. The remaining guard positioned himself near the restaurant's entrance, a silent sentinel against whatever other threats might emerge from Boston's underbelly. Only then did the stranger turn his full attention back to me. His eyes swept over my soaked scrubs, lingering on the fading bruise along my jawline that makeup hadn't quite concealed. Something dangerous flickered in those storm-gray depths. "You're shivering." It wasn't a question, but an observation delivered in that same controlled voice. I was. My entire body trembled, whether from cold or adrenaline or the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. I couldn't tell. The October rain had turned my scrubs into a second skin, clinging uncomfortably to curves I suddenly felt exposed displaying. "My car," he said, gesturing toward a sleek black sedan parked half a block away. Not an invitation. A statement. Every rational thought screamed at me to refuse, to thank him and walk away, to pretend this night had never happened. But Derek's words echoed in my mind. I owe people money, Bella. Bad people. And now this stranger had seen me, helped me, involved himself in whatever mess Derek had created. "I don't even know your name," I whispered. Something that might have been amusement touched his lips. "Lorenzo Benedetti." The name hit me like ice water. Even someone as removed from Boston's criminal underbelly as I was knew that surname. Benedetti. Old money. Old power. Old violence wrapped in expensive suits and legitimate businesses. I'd grabbed the hand of a man whose family name appeared in newspaper headlines and FBI investigations. "You recognize it?" Again, not a question. I nodded mutely, suddenly aware of how small I felt standing next to him. At 5'5", I had to crane my neck to meet his gaze. He towered over me, all controlled strength and dangerous elegance. Good. That means you understand the protection I can offer. His thumb traced across my knuckles. A gesture so gentle it seemed at odds with everything I'd heard about men like him, and the price of refusing it. The threat was velvet-wrapped but unmistakable. I could accept his help and enter his world, or decline and face Derek alone, with whatever bad people Derek owed money to closing in. "What do you want from me?" My voice cracked on the last word. Lorenzo studied my face for a long moment, rain gathering in his dark hair and running down the sharp planes of his cheekbones. "Right now? To get you somewhere warm and dry before you catch pneumonia." He guided me toward the sedan with a hand at the small of my back, his touch burning through the wet fabric of my scrubs. The car was a work of art, all gleaming paint and chrome that probably cost more than I made in 2 years. The interior smelled of leather, and something expensive and masculine that made my pulse quicken. "Giuseppe's Ristorante," Lorenzo told the driver, as I settled into butter-soft leather seats. The penthouse. The penthouse. Of course, a man like Lorenzo Benedetti would own the building above his restaurant. Probably owned half the block, knowing his reputation. As the car pulled smoothly into traffic, I caught sight of my reflection in the tinted window. Wet hair plastered to my skull, green eyes wide with shock and exhaustion, skin pale as porcelain. I looked like a drowned cat who'd stumbled into a tiger's den. "Tell me about Derek Morrison." Lorenzo's voice cut through my self-assessment. I turned to find him watching me with those penetrating eyes, his expression unreadable in the dim interior lighting. "How do you know his last name?" "I make it my business to know things." He adjusted his cufflinks with precise movements. Especially when those things involve men who put their hands on women in my territory. The casual possessiveness in his voice sent shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. My territory. Like Boston's North End belonged to him personally. "We dated for 8 months, I said quietly, focusing on my hands twisted in my lap. I thought he was different. Protective instead of possessive. Strong instead of controlling. A bitter laugh escaped me. Amazing how wrong you can be about someone. When did it start? The violence. Heat flooded my cheeks. How did you... The way you flinch when someone moves too quickly. The way you positioned yourself against that car door tonight, protecting your ribs. His gaze flicked to the fading bruise on my jaw. The way you immediately assumed I wanted something from you in exchange for help. Each observation cut deeper than the last. Was I really that transparent? That obviously damaged? 3 months ago, I admitted, a slap during an argument about money. He apologized, brought flowers, promised it would never happen again. But it did. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. It always got worse when he'd been drinking. And lately, he'd been drinking more. Said he was under pressure at work, that things were complicated. The car turned onto a narrow street lined with historic brownstones, their windows glowing warmly in the rain. Lorenzo's fingers drummed once against his knee, the only sign of agitation he'd shown. What kind of pressure? I don't know. He never told me specifics. I watched raindrops race down the window, distorting the city lights into abstract patterns. But tonight, he said he owed money to bad people, that I could fix all his problems. Lorenzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. By going with him. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, Isabella. The way he said my name, with that faint accent curling around the syllables, made something flutter in my chest. Look at me. I turned reluctantly, meeting those storm-gray eyes in the car's dim interior. Derek Morrison is a dirty cop drowning in debt to people who view human life as currency. His voice carried absolute certainty. If you had gone with him tonight, you wouldn't have survived the week. The casual delivery of that statement hit me like a physical blow. How can you possibly know that? Because I know who he owes money to. Lorenzo leaned forward slightly, the expensive fabric of his suit stretching across his broad shoulders. Mikhail Kozlov. Russian mob. They don't negotiate, and they don't forgive debt. My mouth went dry. Russians? But Derek's a cop. He works with the FBI task force, which makes him valuable to men like Kozlov, until he stops being useful. Lorenzo's smile held no warmth. Then he becomes a liability to be eliminated. The car pulled to a stop in front of an elegant brick building, its ground floor housing the same upscale restaurant where I'd first grabbed Lorenzo's hand. Above it, floors of expensive condominiums rose into the rainy night, their windows glowing like golden eyes. This is your building. Another statement, not a question. Giuseppe's has been in my family for 3 generations, Lorenzo said, stepping out into the rain. My great-grandfather built it when he first came to America. My grandfather expanded it. My father modernized it. He paused, rain beginning to darken his suit. I inherited it when I was 25. The way he said inherited suggested the circumstances hadn't been natural. Men in Lorenzo's world didn't retire to Florida and hand over the family business. The building's entrance was discreet but elegant, all polished marble and subtle lighting. A doorman materialized from nowhere to escort us inside, his respectful nod to Lorenzo speaking volumes about the man beside me. The elevator was a work of art, all brass fixtures and mirrors that reflected my bedraggled appearance from multiple angles. Lorenzo stood beside me in comfortable silence, his presence filling the small space completely. I could smell his cologne now, something woody and expensive that probably cost more than my monthly rent. 60 floors, I observed, watching the numbers climb. Privacy requires altitude. His lips quirked slightly. The higher you climb, the fewer people can reach you. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Boston's skyline. The city spread out below us like a jeweled tapestry. Rain streaked the glass, creating patterns that shifted and reformed with each gust of wind. The space itself was a study in understated luxury. Clean lines, neutral colors, furniture that probably cost more than my car. Everything spoke of wealth, but quiet wealth. The kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. You're still shivering, Lorenzo observed. I was. Despite the penthouse's warmth, I couldn't seem to stop trembling. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind exhaustion and the dawning realization of what my life had become in the span of 1 terrifying hour. Lorenzo disappeared down a hallway and returned with a thick terry cloth robe and a towel. There's a guest bathroom through there, he said, pointing toward an archway. Hot shower. Take as long as you need. The kindness in the gesture nearly undid me. When was the last time someone had offered me comfort without expecting something in return? Why are you helping me? The question tumbled out before I could stop it. Lorenzo moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city below. Rain continued to lash the glass. But from up here, the storm seemed distant and manageable. Maybe I don't like seeing women afraid. He glanced back at me, and something in his expression made my pulse quicken. Or maybe I have my own reasons for wanting Derek Morrison to pay for his mistakes. Before I could ask what he meant, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound cut through the penthouse's quiet like a gunshot, making both of us tense. Derek's name glowed on the screen. Answer it, Lorenzo said quietly. Let him know you're safe. Safe? I stared at him. I'm in the penthouse of a man whose family protects what belongs to them. Lorenzo's eyes met mine, and something passed between us. A current of understanding. or maybe recognition. You grabbed my hand tonight, Isabella. That makes you mine to protect. The phone continued buzzing insistently. Outside, thunder rumbled across the city, and I realized my life had just changed forever. The morning light filtering through Lorenzo's penthouse windows felt surreal, like waking up inside someone else's life. I sat at the marble kitchen island, fingers wrapped around a coffee cup that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, watching Boston stretch out below in golden autumn sunshine. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. 48 hours. That's how long I'd been here, playing the strangest game of house with a man whose very name made people cross the street. 2 days of borrowed silk pajamas, gourmet meals I couldn't pronounce, and the constant, nagging awareness that I was a guest in a gilded cage. You're thinking too loud. Lorenzo's voice came from behind me, rich and slightly amused. I turned to find him leaning against the kitchen doorway, dressed in charcoal slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. Even in this casual state, he radiated the kind of controlled power that made my pulse skip. His dark hair was slightly mussed, and I caught myself wondering if he'd slept badly too. I should go home, I said for the third time since Friday night. I have a life, responsibilities, patients who need me. Dr. Martinez covered your shifts. He moved into the kitchen with that fluid grace I was beginning to recognize, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. Your supervisor was very understanding when I explained you were dealing with a family emergency. I stared at him. You called my hospital? Without asking me? I called everyone who needed to know you were safe. Lorenzo cracked eggs into a bowl with practiced precision. Your landlord knows you'll be away indefinitely. The nursing home where your mother lives received an anonymous donation to cover her care for the next 6 months. Each revelation hit me like a physical blow. You had no right. I had every right. His voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in those gray eyes. The moment you grabbed my hand, you became my responsibility. I'm not your responsibility. I'm not anyone's responsibility but my own. Lorenzo set down the whisk and turned to face me fully. In the morning light, I could see details I'd missed in the rain-soaked darkness of that first night. The scar that bisected his left eyebrow. A thin white line that suggested violence survived. The slight stiffness in his right shoulder when he moved, as if compensating for an old injury. The way his eyes constantly scanned our surroundings, even here in his own home. Tell me about Derek Morrison's debts, he said, ignoring my protest entirely. I don't know anything about his debts. I told you that. Tell me what you do know. It wasn't a request. I sank back onto the bar stool, suddenly exhausted. Fighting Lorenzo felt like trying to move a mountain with my bare hands. He started acting strange about 4 months ago. Paranoid. Jumpy. He'd get phone calls at odd hours and step outside to take them. Lorenzo resumed cooking, but I could feel his attention focused entirely on my words. What kind of calls? I don't know. He always went to another room. I wrapped my hands tighter around the coffee cup, seeking its warmth. But after he'd hang up, he'd be agitated for hours. Sometimes he'd drink until he passed out. And the violence started around the same time. Heat flooded my cheeks. Even after everything, talking about Derek's abuse felt like admitting to some fundamental failure on my part. Yes, he was taking his fear and frustration out on you because he couldn't take it out on the people who actually threatened him. Lorenzo's voice carried an edge of controlled anger. Coward's behavior. The eggs sizzled as they hit the heated pan, the domestic sound at odds with our conversation. Lorenzo moved around the kitchen like he belonged there, which surprised me. Men in his position usually had people to handle mundane tasks like cooking. You know how to cook, I observed, needing to shift away from the subject of Derek's fists. My grandmother insisted all her grandsons learn. Said we'd never find good women if we couldn't feed ourselves. A genuine smile ghosted across his lips. She was a formidable woman, 5 feet tall, and absolutely terrifying. The glimpse of warmth in his expression made something flutter in my chest. Was? Died when I was 26. Lived to see me take over the family business. Made sure I understood the responsibility that came with the name. His smile faded. She would have liked you. How can you possibly know that? Lorenzo plated the eggs alongside perfectly toasted bread and fresh fruit arranged like a piece of art. Because you work in a children's hospital. Because you've been taking care of your mother alone for 3 years. Because when a violent drunk cornered you in a parking garage, your first instinct was to fight, not cower. He set the plate in front of me, and I caught a whiff of his cologne mixed with the scent of cooking. It was disturbingly domestic, this moment of quiet breakfast conversation. As if we were a normal couple discussing normal things instead of a kidnapped nurse and her captor talking about grandmother's recipes. "This isn't kidnapping," Lorenzo said, reading my thoughts with unsettling accuracy. "This is survival. Then I can leave? Right now, if I want?" He was quiet for a long moment, gray eyes studying my face. "Where would you go?" "Back to your apartment, where Derek knows you live. Back to the hospital, where he knows you work. Back to visiting your mother, where he knows you go every Sunday." Each question hammered home the horrible truth I'd been avoiding. Derek had woven himself so thoroughly into my life that there was nowhere he couldn't find me. Nowhere I'd be safe. "He's a police officer," I said weakly. "There are rules, procedures. Rules don't apply to desperate men with gambling debts." Lorenzo leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. "And they certainly don't apply to the people Derek owes money to." I picked at the eggs, my appetite evaporating. "So, what's your solution? I hide in your penthouse forever?" "My solution is that Derek Morrison stops being a problem." The quiet certainty in his voice sent ice through my veins. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't need to worry about him anymore." "Lorenzo." I set down my fork, meeting his gaze directly. "What does that mean?" For a moment, I saw something raw flicker across his features. Not the controlled, dangerous man who'd rescued me from the rain, but someone younger, more vulnerable. Someone who'd inherited terrible responsibilities at 25 and learned to carry them with elegant brutality. "It means I protect what's mine," he said quietly, "by any means necessary." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Lorenzo glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. The moment of vulnerability vanished, replaced by cold professionalism. "Vincent." He answered on the second ring, but I could hear both sides of the conversation in the kitchen's acoustics. "Boss, we got a problem. Morrison's been asking questions. Hit up 3 of his contacts in narcotics, trying to get information on you." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "What kind of information?" "Security details. Where you live, where you go, who you see. He's also been flashing pictures of the girl around the North End." My blood turned to ice water. Derek was hunting me, using his badge and police connections to track me down. And now he was specifically targeting Lorenzo. "Any bites?" Lorenzo's voice remained steady, but I caught the subtle tension in his shoulders. "Nothing solid, but boss, word is he's not working alone anymore. Someone's backing him. Someone with resources. Kozlov. That's what I'm thinking. Morrison's not smart enough to plan this kind of operation solo." Lorenzo ended the call and set the phone down with deliberate care. When he looked at me, his eyes were completely devoid of warmth. "Pack whatever you need for a few days." His voice was all business now. "We're leaving the city." "Leaving." Panic fluttered in my chest. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere Derek Morrison and his Russian friends can't reach you." Lorenzo was already moving, pulling his phone back out to make another call. "Marco, prepare the house in Gloucester. Full security team. We'll be there by noon." "Wait." I stood up, my breakfast forgotten. "You can't just decide to relocate me without consulting me first." Lorenzo paused in his preparations, and when he turned back to me, I saw something that made my breath catch. Not anger exactly, but something deeper and more primal. Possession. "You asked me to help you," he said quietly. "This is what help looks like in my world, Isabella. You don't get to pick and choose which parts of my protection you accept. I'm not your property." "No." He stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "You're something far more valuable than that." "What am I then?" For a heartbeat, he didn't answer. Then his hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb tracing the line of my jaw with surprising gentleness. His touch was warm, calloused in a way that suggested he knew violence intimately, but chose to be gentle with me. "You're the first person in 10 years who looked at me and saw someone worth saving, instead of someone to fear." His voice was barely above a whisper. "That makes you irreplaceable." Before I could respond, he stepped back, the moment of vulnerability gone as quickly as it had come. "Pack light," he said, already moving toward his own room. "We have 30 minutes before the car arrives." I stood frozen in the kitchen, my cheek still burning from his touch, trying to process what had just happened. Lorenzo Benedetti, the man whose name struck fear into Boston's criminal underworld, had just revealed something raw and desperate beneath his controlled exterior. And God help me, I wanted to understand what he meant. The sound of drawers opening and closing came from his bedroom. Efficient and methodical. Whatever safe house he was taking me to, it was clearly well prepared and completely secure. Another piece of the vast machinery he'd built around himself, designed to protect and control in equal measure. I touched my cheek where his hand had been, still feeling the echo of his warmth. 48 hours ago, I'd been a simple pediatric nurse with an abusive ex-boyfriend and mounting medical bills. Now I was the protected asset of a man who could make people disappear with a phone call. The terrifying part wasn't that Lorenzo frightened me. The terrifying part was that he didn't. The safe house in Gloucester sat perched on rocky cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, its weathered shingles and wraparound porch giving it the appearance of a quaint New England cottage. But the illusion shattered the moment I noticed the discreet cameras, the reinforced windows, and the way Lorenzo's men positioned themselves at strategic points around the property. 3 days. 3 days of walking along private beaches, reading in sun-drenched window seats, and pretending this was some kind of romantic getaway instead of protective custody. The October air carried the salt tang of approaching winter, and I'd taken to bundling in one of Lorenzo's sweaters while I sat on the porch, watching seabirds wheel against the gray sky. Lorenzo had been the perfect gentleman. Respectful distance, polite conversation. No repeat of that moment in his penthouse kitchen when his hand had cupped my cheek and made my pulse stutter. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it left me restless and confused, hyper-aware of his presence in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "The sunrise here is extraordinary." His voice came from behind me, rich with that faint accent that made my skin prickle with awareness. I didn't turn around, too afraid he'd see something in my expression I wasn't ready to acknowledge. "It's beautiful. Peaceful. Peaceful is good. Peaceful keeps you alive." Lorenzo settled into the porch chair beside me, extending a steaming mug of coffee. Vincent called. "Derek Morrison visited your hospital yesterday." My blood turned to ice. "What did he want?" "To speak with your supervisor. Claimed he was concerned about your welfare, said you'd been acting erratically before you disappeared." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Dr. Martinez didn't buy it. Told him patient confidentiality prevented her from discussing your personal situation." I set down my coffee with trembling fingers. "He's not going to give up, is he?" "No." Lorenzo leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Men like Derek don't surrender easily, especially when they're desperate." The morning sun caught in his dark hair, highlighting threads of silver I hadn't noticed before. At 34, Lorenzo carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd seen too much, survived too much. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "Tell me about your father." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Lorenzo went very still. "Why do you want to know?" "Because you said you inherited the family business when you were 25. Because yesterday, I watched you order a man's execution over the phone like you were discussing the weather." I turned to face him fully. "Because I need to understand who you really are." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stood, moving to the porch railing with that fluid grace I'd come to recognize. His hands gripped the worn wood, knuckles white with tension. "My father was Antonio Benedetti, third-generation Italian-American, built our legitimate construction business from nothing." Lorenzo's voice was carefully neutral. "He believed in old-world values, family, loyalty, honor. And the other business, the illegal side, that came later. Protection money from shop owners who couldn't afford police response times, loans for families who couldn't get bank approval, dispute resolution for people the courts ignored." Lorenzo's smile held no warmth. "It started as helping the community. It evolved into controlling it." A gust of salt air whipped across the porch, carrying the cry of seagulls and the distant sound of waves against rocks. Lorenzo's profile was sharp against the morning sky, all angular planes and controlled strength. "How did he die?" I asked softly. "Car bomb. outside his favorite restaurant on a Tuesday night in October. Lorenzo's voice never wavered, but I saw his knuckles whiten further. The Kozlov organization wanted our territory. They thought eliminating the head would scatter the family, but it didn't. No. He turned back to me, and I saw something raw flicker in those gray eyes. It just made the survivors more dangerous. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed against the porch table. Lorenzo glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor changed, shoulders tensing as he read the message. What is it? Vincent. Derek Morrison isn't working alone anymore. Lorenzo was already moving, pulling out his phone to make a call. They grabbed Sarah Chen from the pediatric ward at St. Mary's 20 minutes ago. My world tilted sideways. Sarah was a sweet, quiet nurse from the Philippines who worked the same shifts I did. We'd had coffee together dozens of times, shared stories about difficult patients and impossible supervisors. They took Sarah? My voice came out as a whisper. They think she's you. Lorenzo's phone was already ringing. Vincent, talk to me. I could hear Vincent's voice through the speaker, tight with tension. 2 men in a van, grabbed her outside the hospital pharmacy. Professional job. But boss, they fucked up. Chen's got distinctive tattoos on her arms. Nothing like Isabella's description. How long before they realize their mistake? Maybe an hour. Maybe less if they're smart enough to check her ID. Lorenzo's face had gone granite hard, all traces of the man who'd shared stories about his grandmother vanishing behind a mask of cold calculation. Kozlov's people? Has to be. Morrison doesn't have the resources for an operation this clean. My hands started shaking. They'll kill her when they realize she's not me. No. Lorenzo's voice cut through my rising panic. They won't. How can you possibly know that? He ended the call and turned to face me. And what I saw in his expression made my breath catch. Not just anger, but something primitive and protective that spoke to places in my chest I'd thought Derek had killed forever. Because I'm going to get her back. Lorenzo was already moving toward the house, his movements sharp and purposeful. Marco! One of his men appeared instantly, as if he'd been waiting for the summons. Boss, contact every asset we have in Boston. I want locations on Kozlov's operation, full intelligence on his men, and a tactical assessment of where they're most likely holding the girl. You want me to call in favors from the families? Call in everything. Lorenzo's voice carried absolute authority. And get the car ready. We're heading back to the city. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the porch floor. We? You're not staying here while an innocent woman suffers because of the danger following you around. Lorenzo's eyes met mine, and I saw something that made my pulse stutter. Besides, you're going to help me get her back. I don't understand. You're a nurse. You understand medical procedures, hospital layouts, staff rotations. Lorenzo stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with salt air and something darker. And you know Sarah Chen personally. You can identify her positively. Make sure we're rescuing the right person. The logic was sound, but underneath it lay something else. A test, maybe. Or a declaration. Lorenzo was inviting me into his world completely, showing me what it meant to be under his protection. This is dangerous, I said. Though even as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd already made my decision. Everything worthwhile is dangerous. Lorenzo's hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb tracing the line of my jaw just like that morning in his kitchen. The question is whether you trust me to keep you safe while we save your friend. His touch sent heat spiraling through my chest, awakening responses I'd thought Derek had beaten out of me forever. Standing there on that windswept porch, with the Atlantic stretching endlessly before us and danger closing in from behind, I realized something that should have terrified me. I did trust him, completely and without reservation. What do you need me to do? I asked. Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. Not surprise exactly, but satisfaction. As if I'd just passed some crucial test he'd been waiting for me to take. First, you're going to tell me everything you know about St. Mary's security protocols and shift changes. His hand dropped from my face, but the warmth of his touch lingered. Then you're going to help me plan Sarah Chen's rescue. And after that, Lorenzo's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. After that, you're going to watch me teach Derek Morrison and his Russian friends what happens when they threaten what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it sent a thrill of anticipation down my spine. that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the growing certainty that Lorenzo Benedetti was about to go to war. And somehow, impossibly, I wanted to stand beside him when he did. "When do we leave?" I asked. 1 hour. Lorenzo was already heading toward the house, his movements sharp with purpose. "Pack light and dress dark. Where we're going, visibility gets people killed." I watched him disappear inside, then turned back to the ocean one last time. The peaceful morning had shattered completely, replaced by the metallic taste of approaching violence. Sarah was in danger because of me, because I'd grabbed a stranger's hand in a moment of desperation and dragged an innocent woman into a war between dangerous men. But as I followed Lorenzo into the house, one thought echoed in my mind with startling clarity. For the first time in months, I wasn't running from the fight. I was running toward it. The manila folder on Lorenzo's desk contained my entire life reduced to photographs and printed reports. Bank statements showing my mother's medical bills, employment records from St. Mary's, even copies of text messages I'd sent to colleagues about picking up extra shifts. Everything was there, laid out with clinical precision that made my skin crawl. "How long have you been watching me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Lorenzo stood behind his desk in the penthouse study, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the Boston skyline. We'd returned from Gloucester 3 hours ago, Sarah's rescue mission planned down to the minute. But first, apparently, came this moment of truth. "Vincent has been conducting background checks on everyone in your social circle since Friday night. His reflection in the window looked carved from stone. Standard security protocol when someone enters my protection. That's not what I asked." I flipped through pages of surveillance photos. Me leaving the hospital. Me visiting my mother. Me grocery shopping on a Tuesday afternoon, completely unaware I was being documented. "These photos go back weeks, Lorenzo. Maybe months." He turned slowly, and the expression on his face confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. 6 months. The admission hit me like a physical blow. 6 months? You've been stalking me for 6 months? I've been watching you. His voice remained maddeningly calm. "There's a difference." "Is there?" I stood up so quickly the chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been planning this entire thing from the beginning." Lorenzo moved around the desk with that predatory grace, stopping just close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "Planning what, exactly?" "This. Us. Whatever this is supposed to be." I gestured at the opulent study, the protected penthouse, the carefully constructed cage he'd built around me. "Did you orchestrate Derek's debt too? Make sure he'd get desperate enough to threaten me so you'd have an excuse to swoop in and play savior?" Something dangerous flickered in those gray eyes. "Be very careful what you accuse me of, Isabella." "Or what? You'll have me disappeared like you're planning to do to Derek?" The words tumbled out, fueled by betrayal and growing panic. "How do I know any of this is real? How do I know Derek wasn't working for you all along?" Lorenzo's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "Because if Derek Morrison was working for me, you would never have suffered a single bruise at his hands." The quiet certainty in his statement gave me pause, but I was too angry to back down. "Then why? Why watch me? Why choose me?" For a long moment, Lorenzo said nothing. Then he moved to a cabinet against the far wall, withdrawing a crystal decanter and 2 glasses. His movements were precise, controlled, but I caught the slight tremor in his hands as he poured. "Do you know what it's like to inherit a legacy built on blood?" He didn't look at me as he spoke. "To wake up one morning and discover that everything you thought you knew about your life was a carefully constructed lie?" I remained silent, sensing this was important. That whatever he was about to tell me would change everything between us. I was 25 when my father died. A business major from Harvard, completely insulated from the family's real operations. Lorenzo handed me a glass, his fingers brushing mine. "I thought we were construction contractors who occasionally helped out struggling families in the neighborhood." The whiskey burned as it went down, but I welcomed the distraction. "When did you learn the truth?" "At his funeral. When Mikhail Kozlov approached me to offer his condolences and explain exactly what kind of business relationship he'd had with Antonio Benedetti." Lorenzo's laugh held no humor. "Apparently my father had been quietly expanding into territories the Russians considered theirs. So Kozlov killed him. Kozlov ordered it. Derek Morrison planted the bomb. Lorenzo's eyes met mine over the rim of his glass. Your ex-boyfriend murdered my father, Isabella. That's why he owes the Russians money. That's why they own him completely. The revelation hit me like ice water. Derek hadn't just been abusive, he'd been a killer. A bomb maker who destroyed Lorenzo's family for money. You knew. My voice came out as a whisper. When I grabbed your hand that night, you already knew who Derek was. I knew Derek Morrison was a dirty cop in debt to Russian criminals. I knew he'd killed my father. Lorenzo set down his glass and stepped closer. What I didn't know was that he'd been using his badge to terrorize an innocent woman for months. But you'd been watching me, following me. I backed away until my shoulders hit the window. Why? Because Derek Morrison mentioned you. During one of his increasingly desperate calls to his Russian handlers. Lorenzo's voice dropped lower, more intimate. He told them about his ex-girlfriend, the pretty nurse who worked at St. Mary's, how she'd be perfect collateral if they needed leverage. My blood turned to ice. He was planning to sell me. He was planning to offer you as payment for his debt, interest on what he owed for my father's murder. Lorenzo reached out, his fingers ghosting along my jawline. I started watching you to understand what kind of weapon Derek thought he had. What I found was something entirely different. What did you find? A woman who worked double shifts to pay for her mother's care, who volunteered at the children's hospital on her days off, who smiled at homeless people and bought coffee for strangers and treated every patient like they were family. His thumb traced across my cheekbone. A woman who deserved protection, not exploitation. The gentleness in his touch made my chest ache. So, you decided to protect me. I decided to understand you, to learn your patterns, your routines, the things that made you feel safe. Lorenzo's other hand came up to frame my face completely. I told myself it was reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, but it wasn't. No, his voice was barely above a whisper. It was obsession. The admission hung between us like a live wire, dangerous and electric. Lorenzo's hands on my face were warm, steady, nothing like Derek's violent possessiveness. This was different. Darker, maybe, but infinitely more careful. You could have approached me differently, I said. Told me about Derek's debt, warned me about the danger, and you would have gone to the police, filed reports, trusted the system to protect you. Lorenzo's smile was sharp as a blade. Derek Morrison is the system, Isabella. He would have buried your complaints and escalated his timeline. So instead you waited for him to corner me in a parking garage. I waited for you to need me. His hands dropped from my face, and immediately I missed their warmth. I waited for circumstances to align so that when I offered you protection, you'd be desperate enough to accept it. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and execution. Lorenzo hadn't saved me from Derek's violence. He'd simply positioned himself to be available when that violence finally escalated beyond my ability to handle it alone. I should be furious, I said quietly. You should be. You should demand I take you somewhere safe and leave you alone forever. Lorenzo moved back to his desk, putting distance between us. You should run as far and as fast as you can from what I represent. But I'm not going to. No? He looked up, and I saw something vulnerable flicker in those gray eyes. No. I crossed to where he stood, closing the distance he'd created. Because Sarah is still out there, scared and alone. Because Derek Morrison helped murder your father. And because despite everything you've done, I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone. Lorenzo went very still. Isabella, you manipulated the situation, yes. You watched me without consent, invaded my privacy, orchestrated circumstances to make yourself indispensable. I reached up, cupping his face the way he'd done to me. But you also paid my mother's medical bills anonymously. You made sure I was safe at work. You never let Derek hurt me worse than he already had. That doesn't excuse what I've done. No, it doesn't. I stepped closer, until there was no space left between us. But it explains why you did it. And right now, understanding you matters more to me than forgiving you. For a heartbeat. Neither of us moved. Then Lorenzo's control shattered completely. He kissed me with a hunger that spoke of months of careful distance, of watching from shadows, and wanting what he couldn't have. His hands tangled in my hair. holding me steady as he claimed my mouth with devastating thoroughness. I kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring weeks of confusion and attraction and desperate need into the contact. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against mine. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "I know. Once we save Sarah, once we deal with Derek and Kozlov, you'll be free to leave, to go back to your normal life." His eyes searched mine. "But if you stay, if you choose this, there's no going back." My world doesn't offer second chances or clean exits. I thought about my cramped apartment, my lonely shifts at the hospital, the small, safe life I'd built for myself. Then I thought about the way Lorenzo looked at me like I was something precious and dangerous and worth protecting at any cost. "I'm not going anywhere," I told him. Something fierce and possessive flared in his expression. "You're sure?" Instead of answering, I kissed him again, soft and certain and full of promise. When I pulled back, Lorenzo's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. "Then let's go get your friend back." Sarah was alive. Terrified but alive, cable tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse near Boston Harbor, her dark hair matted with dried blood from where they'd struck her during the kidnapping. Through my binoculars, I could see the distinctive cherry blossom tattoo on her left forearm, confirmation that Kozlov's men had indeed grabbed the wrong woman. 12 men that we can count, Vincent murmured into his comm device. 2 on the roof, 4 patrolling the perimeter, 6 inside with the hostage. I crouched beside Lorenzo behind a shipping container, my heart hammering against my ribs as we surveyed the warehouse from our concealed position. The salt air carried the tang of low tide and diesel fuel, mixing with the metallic taste of approaching violence that seemed to coat everything in Lorenzo's world. "Where's Derek?" Lorenzo's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried deadly intent. "No sign of him yet, but boss, we got a problem. Lucas just called in. Kozlov's people grabbed Clara Martinez 20 minutes ago." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Lucas was Lorenzo's younger brother, his second in command and most trusted lieutenant. Clara was Lucas's girlfriend, a sweet archaeology student who taught children's art classes on weekends. She had nothing to do with any of this except the misfortune of loving a Benedetti. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "Where?" "Outside her apartment near BU campus. Professional job, same as the nurse. 3 men, black SUV, gone in under 30 seconds. Vincent's voice crackled through the earpiece. Lucas is compromised." Lorenzo finished the thought with cold precision. "Emotional, desperate, likely to make stupid decisions that get people killed." I touched his arm, feeling the coiled tension beneath his jacket sleeve. "We can save them both." "No." Lorenzo's eyes never left the warehouse as he spoke. "We save Sarah first. Methodically. According to plan. Then we deal with Clara and whatever leverage Kozlov thinks he has over my brother." The calculating coldness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it was oddly reassuring. This was Lorenzo in his element, compartmentalizing emotions to focus on tactical necessities. The kind of man who could dismantle an enemy's entire operation while maintaining perfect control. "What about the inside team?" I asked, studying the warehouse layout through the binoculars. "Marco and Tony are positioned at the north entrance. Vincent's team has the east side covered." Lorenzo adjusted his position slightly, and I caught the gleam of the handgun holstered beneath his jacket. "You and I go in through the loading dock, quick and quiet." "And if something goes wrong?" Lorenzo's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Then Mikhail Kozlov learns why my father built this organization to survive his death. We moved across the open ground between containers like ghosts, using shadows and strategic timing to avoid the roving patrols. Lorenzo moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this before, many times, and his confidence steadied my nerves even as adrenaline flooded my system. The loading dock was secured with a chain-link gate that Vincent had already cut, leaving an opening just wide enough for us to slip through. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of stacked pallets and industrial equipment, all draped in shadows that seemed to move and shift in the dim lighting. Sarah's voice reached us before we saw her, weak but defiant as she spoke to her captors in broken English mixed with Tagalog curses that would have made her grandmother proud. "American police will find you," she was saying, her accent thick with fear, but her tone stubborn. "You cannot hide forever." A Russian-accented voice responded with cruel laughter. Police already know where you are, little bird. Police brought you to us. Derek. It had to be Derek feeding information to Kozlov's operation, using his badge and connections to facilitate kidnappings in broad daylight. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected, not because I still cared about him, but because it confirmed how completely I'd misjudged someone I'd once trusted. Lorenzo gestured for me to stay back as he moved closer to the main area where they were holding Sarah. Through gaps in the stacked crates, I could see her clearly now, cable-tied to a metal folding chair, her St. Mary's scrubs torn and stained, but her chin lifted in defiance even as tears tracked down her cheeks. 3 men stood around her, 2 Russians in expensive suits, and one who made my blood freeze. Derek Morrison, still in his police uniform, badge gleaming under the warehouse's fluorescent lights as he leaned casually against a workbench. "This is taking too long," Derek was saying, checking his watch. "Benedetti should have made contact by now." "Patience," replied one of the Russians, a thin man with silver hair and cold eyes. "Fear makes men sloppy. Let him worry about his woman a little longer. She's not his woman. She's my ex-girlfriend. And she's nothing special." Derek's voice carried the bitter edge I remembered from our worst fights. "Isabella Rossi is a nobody nurse with more debt than sense. Then why does Lorenzo Benedetti protect her like she's family?" The Russian stepped closer to Sarah, who shrank back in her chair. "Why does he move her to safe house? Why does he mobilize his entire organization when she disappears?" Derek had no answer for that, and I saw uncertainty flicker across his features. He'd expected Lorenzo's interest in me to be casual, temporary. The depth of resources being deployed to ensure my safety clearly surprised him. Lorenzo's hand touched my shoulder, and I turned to find him gesturing toward a side corridor that would bring us closer to Sarah's position. We moved together, careful to avoid the creaking floorboards and metal debris that littered the warehouse floor. "The other girl is more valuable," Derek said suddenly, his voice carrying a desperate edge. "Clara Martinez. She's dating Benedetti's brother. That's real leverage." "Perhaps." The Russian's smile was coldly amused. "But this one serves our purposes for now. When Benedetti arrives to negotiate, we will have answers to interesting questions. And if he doesn't come, then we send pieces of his woman to Lucas Benedetti until he becomes more cooperative." The casual brutality in the Russian's voice made Sarah whimper softly. That's when Lorenzo moved. He emerged from the shadows like death incarnate, moving with lethal precision that spoke of years of practice and absolutely no hesitation about violence. The first Russian never saw him coming, Lorenzo's arm snaking around his throat and applying pressure to the carotid artery until the man dropped unconscious to the concrete floor. The second Russian spun toward the sound, hand reaching for the gun holstered beneath his jacket, but Lorenzo was already there. A vicious strike to the solar plexus doubled the man over, followed by a knee to the face that sent him crashing backward into a stack of wooden pallets. Derek fumbled for his service weapon, but his hands were shaking and his movements clumsy with panic. "Benedetti, I know you're here." "Yes, you do." Lorenzo stepped into the light, completely calm despite having just incapacitated 2 trained killers in under 10 seconds. "The question is whether you're smart enough to surrender. I've got backup coming," Derek said, his gun finally clear of its holster but wavering as he tried to aim at Lorenzo. "This warehouse is surrounded. Your backup consists of Mikhail Kozlov's men, most of whom are currently unconscious or dead." Lorenzo's smile was terrifying in its complete lack of emotion. "My people are significantly better trained than yours." As if to emphasize his point, the warehouse lights suddenly went out, plunging everything into darkness except for the pale glow filtering through high windows. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, casting everything in hellish red that made the scene look like something from a nightmare. "Isabella!" Derek's voice cracked as he spun around, searching the shadows. "I know you're here too. This is all your fault. If you'd just come with me Friday night, none of this would have happened." I stepped into the light before Lorenzo could stop me, facing the man who'd terrorized me for months. In the red emergency lighting, Derek looked older, more desperate, hollow-eyed with the kind of desperation that made men dangerous. "You're right," I said quietly. "If I'd gone with you Friday night, I'd be dead by now. Just like you're going to be." Derek's gun swung toward me, but Lorenzo was faster. The shot that rang out echoed through the warehouse like thunder, but it wasn't Derek who fired. Lorenzo's bullet took Derek's center mass, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the concrete. He dropped to his knees, hands pressed against the spreading red stain on his uniform shirt, looking up at me with something that might have been surprise. "You chose him," Derek whispered, blood frothing at the corners of his mouth. "Over me? Over everything we had." "We never had anything," I told him, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You had control, and I had fear." "That's not love, Derek. That's just violence wrapped in pretty words." Derek Morrison died still looking confused about the distinction. I should have felt something, watching the man who dominated my nightmares for months bleed out on a warehouse floor. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction, or even grief for what we might have been under different circumstances. Instead, I felt nothing at all except a strange sense of completion, like closing a book I'd never wanted to read in the first place. Lorenzo was already moving toward Sarah, producing a tactical knife to cut through her restraints. She collapsed forward the moment she was free, sobbing with relief and terror as I rushed to check her for serious injuries. "Sarah, it's okay. It's Isabella. You're safe now." I ran my hands over her arms and head, checking for fractures or signs of concussion. "Can you tell me where it hurts?" "Everywhere," she whispered, clinging to my hands like a lifeline. "They said they were going to kill me. Said they were going to cut off pieces and send them to someone named Benedetti. That's not going to happen." Lorenzo appeared beside us, his voice gentle in a way that seemed at odds with the violence he'd just unleashed. "You're under my protection now, Miss Chen. No one will hurt you again." Sarah looked between us, intelligence flickering in her dark eyes despite the trauma. "You're him, the man Isabella grabbed. I am, and you came to save me." We both did. Lorenzo's gaze met mine over Sarah's head, and something passed between us that had nothing to do with words, and everything to do with the choice I'd made to stand beside him in his world of shadows and violence. "What about Clara?" I asked as we helped Sarah to her feet. Lorenzo's expression hardened again, the gentle protector disappearing behind the mask of the Don. "Now we get my brother's girlfriend back." And then Mikhail Kozlov learns what it cost to threaten a Benedetti. As we made our way toward the warehouse exit, Sarah leaning heavily on my arm, and Lorenzo's men materializing from the shadows to escort us to safety, I realized something that should have terrified me. I wasn't leaving Lorenzo's world anymore. I was becoming part of it. The phone call came at 3 a.m, shattering the fragile peace Lorenzo and I had built during the 24 hours since Sarah's rescue. I jerked awake in his arms, my heart hammering as the ringtone cut through the penthouse's silence like a blade. Lorenzo was instantly alert, reaching for his phone with the reflexes of a man who'd learned to expect danger during vulnerable moments. The caller ID made his jaw tighten with lethal intent. "Lucas." He answered without preamble, his voice sharp with controlled tension. I could hear his brother's voice through the speaker, rough with desperation and barely controlled panic. "They want to make a trade, Enzo. Clara for Isabella. Tomorrow night at midnight. Pier 47. My blood turned to ice water. Despite everything we'd done, despite Derek's death and the rescue mission's success, Mikhail Kozlov still had leverage. Still had the power to force Lorenzo's hand by threatening innocent people. "Is Clara alive?" Lorenzo's question was clinical, emotionless, but I felt the tension coiling through his muscles like a living thing. "They let me speak to her for 30 seconds. She's scared, but unharmed. For now." Lucas's voice cracked slightly. "Enzo, they're going to kill her if we don't comply." Kozlov made that very clear. Lorenzo sat up, running a hand through his dark hair as his mind processed tactical possibilities. "How many men does he have with him?" I counted 12 during the exchange. But there could be more positioned around the pier. Lucas paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of desperate pleading I'd never heard from Lorenzo's controlled younger brother. "They want Isabella, Enzo. Specifically her. Kozlov said he's been planning something special for the woman who caused him so much trouble." I slipped out of bed, pulling on one of Lorenzo's shirts as I moved to the window overlooking Boston Harbor. Somewhere out there, Clara Martinez was being held by men who viewed human life as currency, who would torture and kill her without hesitation if their demands weren't met. It's a trap, I said quietly, not turning from the window. Kozlov knows you'd never hand me over willingly. He's counting on us trying to rescue Clara, walking into whatever kill box he's prepared. Lorenzo's reflection appeared in the glass behind me, his expression carved from stone. You're right, which is why we're not going to play by his rules. What do you mean? Lucas, are you listening? Lorenzo spoke into the phone while his eyes held mine in the window's reflection. I'm here. Tell me about the pier. Security cameras, escape routes, structural weaknesses, everything you observed during the meeting. For the next 20 minutes, Lucas provided detailed intelligence about Pier 47, its layout, and the positions he'd seen Kozlov's men occupy. I listened with growing dread as the scope of the trap became clear. The pier was isolated, surrounded by water on 3 sides, with limited access points and no cover for approaching rescuers. It's a killing ground. Vincent's voice came through as Lorenzo conference called his lieutenant. Classic ambush setup. They're not planning to let anyone walk away from this exchange. Then we don't go to the exchange, I said, turning from the window to face Lorenzo directly. We find where they're holding Clara and extract her before the meeting. Lorenzo's smile was sharp as broken glass. My thoughts exactly. What followed was the most intense planning session of my life. Lorenzo transformed from protective lover into tactical commander, deploying resources with surgical precision while coordinating with contacts throughout Boston's criminal underworld. I watched in fascination as he became the man who'd built an empire from his father's blood, commanding absolute loyalty through a combination of respect and carefully applied fear. Kozlov's using the old fish processing plant on Turner Street, Vincent reported after 2 hours of reconnaissance. Heavy security, but our inside man confirmed Clara's being held in the main office on the 2nd floor. Inside man? I asked. Lorenzo's expression was grim. One of Kozlov's lieutenants has gambling debts to our casino. Sometimes financial leverage is more effective than bullets. By dawn, the plan was set. Marco and Tony would create a diversion at the pier, making Kozlov believe we were attempting the exchange as demanded. Meanwhile, Lorenzo's main force would hit the processing plant, extracting Clara while Kozlov was distracted. And me? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. You stay here. Safe. Protected. Lorenzo cupped my face in his hands, thumbs tracing my cheekbones with infinite gentleness. This isn't negotiable, Isabella. Like hell it isn't. I pulled back, meeting his gaze with stubborn determination. Clara is in danger because of me. Because Kozlov wants to hurt you through me. I'm not hiding in this penthouse, while other people risk their lives to clean up my mess. This isn't your mess. This is the price of being mine. Lorenzo's voice carried absolute finality. And I won't risk losing you to settle old debts. We argued for another hour, but Lorenzo was immovable on this point. I would remain in the penthouse under heavy guard while he dismantled Kozlov's operation piece by piece. It was logical, tactical, and completely unacceptable to every fiber of my being, which is why, 3 hours later, I found myself crouched behind shipping containers at the processing plant, watching Lorenzo's team take their positions around the building. I'd slipped past his guards using knowledge gained during my years as a nurse, exploiting shift changes and blind spots with the same precision I used to navigate busy hospital corridors. Vincent's voice crackled through the stolen earpiece I'd lifted from Lorenzo's desk. Teams in position. Boss, we're ready for your signal. Clara's location confirmed? Lorenzo's voice was tight with controlled tension. 2nd floor office, northeast corner. 2 guards at the door, unknown number inside. I could see Lorenzo from my position, a dark figure against the pre-dawn sky as he prepared to lead the assault on the building where Clara was being held. Even from a distance, his movements spoke of coiled violence and absolute determination. That's when everything went wrong. The explosion came from the direction of Pier 47, a massive fireball that lit up the Boston Harbor skyline and sent shock waves rippling across the water. Lorenzo's diversion team had walked into something far worse than an ambush. Marco's team is down. Vincent's voice carried panic for the first time since I'd known him. Boss, it was a setup. Kozlov had explosives rigged throughout the pier structure. Lorenzo's response was a string of Italian profanity that needed no translation. Kozlov had outmaneuvered us, using our own tactical assumptions against us while preparing a trap within a trap. New plan. Lorenzo's voice cut through the chaos with deadly calm. We hit this building now, hard and fast, before Kozlov realizes his diversion failed. Clara comes out alive, whatever it takes. The assault began with surgical precision. Lorenzo's men moved like ghosts through the processing plant, neutralizing guards with silenced weapons and tactical efficiency. I watched from my hiding spot as they systematically cleared each floor, working their way toward Clara's location with methodical violence. Then I saw him. Mikhail Kozlov himself, emerging from a black sedan that had just arrived at the plant's rear entrance. Silver-haired, elegantly dressed, moving with the confidence of a man who believed he controlled every variable in the equation. He wasn't alone. 6 heavily armed men flanked him as he entered the building, and I realized with growing horror that Kozlov hadn't been fooled by the diversion at all. He'd expected Lorenzo to attempt a rescue operation and had positioned himself to personally oversee Clara's execution when it began. I keyed the stolen radio. Lorenzo, Kozlov just arrived at the rear entrance with reinforcements. He's heading for the 2nd floor. Silence stretched across the comm channel before Lorenzo's voice came back, deadly quiet. Isabella, what the hell are you doing here? Being useful. Clara's in immediate danger. Kozlov isn't here for a prisoner exchange. He's here for a public execution. He wants you to watch her die. Another pause. Then Lorenzo's voice again, this time carrying resignation mixed with fury. Vincent? Isabella's position? North side, behind the blue containers. Boss, she's got good cover, but she's completely exposed if this goes sideways. I could practically hear Lorenzo's teeth grinding as he processed this new complication. Then, with the adaptability that had made him Boston's most feared crime lord, he shifted tactics entirely. Isabella, can you see the 2nd floor windows from your position? Yes. Northeast corner, 2 guards visible. In approximately 3 minutes, those guards are going to be very distracted by explosions and gunfire. If Clara appears at that window, if she's in immediate danger, I need you to guide her to safety. My mouth went dry. Guide her how? There's a fire escape on the building's north wall. If she can reach it, if she can climb down, you'll be her only chance of getting out alive. Before I could respond, the war began in earnest. Lorenzo's team hit the processing plant like a hurricane, breaching multiple entry points simultaneously while laying down suppressing fire that turned the pre-dawn quiet into a cacophony of violence. Muzzle flashes lit up the building's windows like deadly fireworks, and the sound of automatic weapons echoed across the harbor. I pressed myself deeper into cover as stray bullets sparked off metal containers around me, my heart hammering with terror and adrenaline. This wasn't like the warehouse rescue, surgical and controlled. This was urban warfare, chaotic and deadly, with Clara's life hanging in the balance. Movement at the 2nd floor window caught my attention. Clara's face appeared briefly, pressed against the glass, her mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear over the gunfire. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Mikhail Kozlov, his silver hair gleaming as he grabbed her by the throat. Lorenzo! I keyed the radio desperately. Kozlov has Clara at the window. He's going to... The window exploded outward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. For one horrible moment, I thought Kozlov had thrown Clara to her death. Then I realized what I was seeing. Clara Martinez, 23-year-old archaeology student and children's art teacher, had grabbed a desk lamp and used it to smash through the window herself. She perched on the narrow ledge, bleeding from multiple cuts, looking down at the 30-foot drop to the alley below. Kozlov appeared behind her, gun in hand, his face twisted with rage, as he realized his hostage was attempting to escape. That's when I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I stood up from behind the containers, making myself visible to both Clara and Kozlov, and shouted at the top of my lungs, "Clara! The fire escape! North side!" Kozlov's gun swung toward me, muzzle flash strobing in the pre-dawn darkness as bullets sparked off metal and concrete around my position. But Clara heard me, saw me, understood what I was telling her. She jumped. Not down to the alley, but sideways, toward the building's north wall where the fire escape ladder waited. Her fingers caught the metal rungs, and she hung there for a terrifying moment before beginning her descent. Kozlov's attention followed her movement, his gun tracking toward Clara's vulnerable form on the fire escape. I could see him taking aim, preparing to end Lucas's girlfriend with cold precision. That's when Lorenzo appeared behind Kozlov like an avenging angel, moving through the shattered window with lethal grace. His knife found Kozlov's throat before the Russian could fire, opening his carotid artery in a spray of arterial blood that painted the window frame crimson. Mikhail Kozlov, the man who'd ordered Antonio Benedetti's death and terrorized Boston's underworld for decades, died gurgling his own blood while staring down at the woman who'd escaped his carefully planned revenge. Clara reached the ground, just as Lorenzo's men finished securing the building. I ran to her, catching her as she collapsed, checking her for serious injuries while sirens wailed in the distance. "Is it over?" Clara whispered, clinging to my hands with desperate strength. I looked up at the second-floor window where Lorenzo stood silhouetted against the rising sun, Kozlov's blood still dripping from his blade. "Yes," I told her, and meant it. "It's over." But as Lorenzo's gaze found mine across the distance separating us, I realized something fundamental had changed during the violence and chaos of the morning. I wasn't the same woman who'd grabbed a stranger's hand in the rain a week ago. I was someone else entirely. Someone harder, more dangerous, and completely committed to the man who'd just killed to protect the people I cared about. Someone who belonged in Lorenzo Benedetti's world of shadows and blood. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our private office on the 15th floor of Benedetti Construction's headquarters, casting golden patterns across architectural plans and medical supply invoices that covered Lorenzo's mahogany desk. Outside, Boston stretched in all directions, a city that no longer felt foreign or dangerous, but like something I helped protect. I initialed the final purchase order for the new pediatric wing at St. Mary's, officially completing the largest charitable donation in the hospital's history. The Isabella Benedetti Foundation had funded everything from new surgical equipment to a state-of-the-art children's cancer research facility, all while maintaining complete anonymity about its benefactor's true identity. "The board meeting went well?" Lorenzo asked, looking up from construction contracts as I set aside the medical files. "Dr. Martinez sends her regards, and her gratitude." I moved around the desk to where he sat, unconsciously settling onto his lap in a gesture that had become natural over the months. "The new wing will serve 3 times as many children as the old facility." Lorenzo's arms encircled my waist, pulling me closer against his chest. At 34, he carried himself with the same controlled danger that had first captured my attention. But now I saw the gentleness beneath the careful mask. The way his touch always lingered on my wedding ring, the platinum band he'd slipped onto my finger in a private ceremony 3 months ago. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question he'd posed countless times since I'd chosen to leave my nursing career and join his world completely. "About the hospital work?" "Sometimes." I traced the thin scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a memento from the night Kozlov died. "About you?" "Never." The Isabella Benedetti, who'd grabbed a stranger's hand in the rain, would barely recognize the woman I'd become. Gone were the financial struggles, the sleepless nights worrying about my mother's care, the constant fear that had defined my existence with Derek. In their place was a different kind of tension, sharper and more purposeful, the knowledge that I now stood at the center of an empire built on calculated violence and absolute loyalty. "Vincent's report came in this morning," Lorenzo said, his fingers combing through my hair with practiced affection. "The Torino family has accepted our terms for the harbor contracts." I nodded, understanding the implications. 6 months of careful negotiation had secured Benedetti Construction's dominance over Boston's waterfront development, generating millions in legitimate revenue while providing cover for less legal enterprises. It was the kind of strategic victory that would have been impossible without the intelligence network we'd built together. "And the other matter?" I asked. Lorenzo's expression darkened slightly. Commissioner Walsh confirmed it. "Derek Morrison's death has been officially ruled a gang killing. Case closed. The investigation into Kozlov's organization died with him." Relief flooded through me, though I maintained the composed exterior I'd learned was essential in Lorenzo's world. Derek's death had been necessary, justified, and completely illegal. Having it disappear into bureaucratic limbo removed the last shadow hanging over our new life. My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. Now Lucas's fiancée and my closest friend in this rarefied world of organized crime wives and girlfriends. The message showed a photo from their engagement party planning. Her radiant smile a stark contrast to the terrified woman I'd helped rescue from that fire escape. "Clara wants to know if we're free for dinner Sunday," I told Lorenzo. "Lucas is cooking." Lucas can barely make coffee without supervision. Clara's been teaching him. Apparently, he's developed a passion for Italian cuisine. I laughed, imagining Lorenzo's younger brother struggling with pasta and sauce while his archaeology student girlfriend provided patient instruction. She says it's adorable watching him try to impress her grandmother. Lorenzo's smile was genuine, the expression transforming his features from dangerous to devastatingly handsome. Tell them yes. It will be good for Lucas to show off his domestic skills. The intercom on his desk buzzed softly. "Mr. Benedetti, your 2:00 appointment is here. Send them in." The office door opened to admit Vincent and Marco, both men nodding respectfully as they entered. 6 months had transformed my relationship with Lorenzo's inner circle from wary acceptance to genuine trust, built through shared danger and demonstrated loyalty. "The Amalfi property is ready for your inspection," Vincent reported, setting a folder on the desk. "Full security installation, private airstrip, complete communications array. Your honeymoon location, as requested." I glanced at Lorenzo in surprise. We'd discussed taking a delayed honeymoon once the territorial disputes were settled, but he'd been characteristically secretive about the details. "Italy?" I asked. "The Amalfi Coast, my great-grandmother's village." Lorenzo's fingers intertwined with mine, and I caught the gleam of his own wedding band, white gold that matched my own. "I thought it was time you met the rest of the family." The rest of the family. The phrase carried weight in Lorenzo's world, implications that went far beyond simple relatives. Meeting the Italian Benedettis meant formal recognition, acceptance into a dynasty that stretched back generations. "How long?" I asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on how negotiations go with the old families. Lorenzo's smile turned predatory. "It seems our success in Boston has attracted attention from Palermo." Vincent cleared his throat diplomatically. "There's also the matter of the Chicago representatives. They've requested a meeting about territorial boundaries in the Midwest." I listened as Lorenzo and his men discussed expansion possibilities, territorial agreements, and revenue projections with the same casual precision I'd once used to discuss patient care rotations. The language was different, the stakes infinitely higher, but the underlying structure felt familiar. Problems to solve, people to protect, systems to optimize. "What about St. Mary's?" I asked when they finished. "I have 3 foundation meetings scheduled next week. Sarah can handle the day-to-day operations," Lorenzo replied. "She's proven remarkably capable at managing charitable distributions." Sarah Chen had surprised everyone by requesting a position with the foundation, rather than returning to nursing after her rescue. The trauma of her kidnapping had left her unable to handle the stress of hospital work, but she'd discovered a talent for organizing relief efforts and coordinating medical supply donations. "And my mother? The care facility in Amalfi has been thoroughly vetted. Your mother will receive the same level of care she gets here, with the added benefit of Mediterranean climate and specialized dementia treatment." Lorenzo cupped my face gently. "She'll be safe, Isabella. They all will." After Vincent and Marco left with their instructions, I remained in Lorenzo's lap, processing the magnitude of what he'd planned. A honeymoon that was also a diplomatic mission, introducing me to the most powerful crime families in Europe while establishing our position in the international hierarchy. "Are you nervous?" Lorenzo asked, reading my thoughts with unsettling accuracy. "Should I be? The old families can be traditional in their expectations of women." His thumb traced across my cheekbone. "But you've proven yourself in ways they'll respect. You've shed blood to protect family. You've built legitimate enterprises that benefit the organization. You've earned your place beside me through action, not just marriage." The weight of his words settled over me like a mantle. 6 months ago, I'd been a pediatric nurse struggling to pay bills and avoid an abusive ex-boyfriend. Now I was the wife of Boston's most powerful crime lord, the silent partner in a multi-million-dollar empire, a woman who'd killed to protect the people she loved. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked. "The simplicity of your life before I grabbed your hand that night?" Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. his hands stroking through my hair as he considered the question. "I miss the illusion of simplicity," he said finally. "The belief that I could keep the violence compartmentalized, separate from everything else. But you didn't complicate my life, Isabella. You completed it. Even though I've made you vulnerable, given your enemies something they can use against you, you've made me stronger." Lorenzo's voice carried absolute conviction. "A man with nothing to lose is dangerous, but a man with everything to protect is unstoppable." The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Below us, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, millions of people living their lives completely unaware of the conversations and decisions being made in towers like this one. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, terrified and alone, convinced that her life was spiraling beyond control. She could never have imagined this moment, this sense of belonging to something larger and more dangerous than anything she'd ever dreamed possible. "I love you," I said, the words still carrying the weight of surprise even after months of marriage. "And I love you." Lorenzo's response was immediate, certain, backed by actions that had proven its truth in blood and sacrifice. More than power, more than the organization, more than life itself. He kissed me then, soft and deep and full of promise, tasting of coffee and determination and the kind of dangerous devotion that built empires and toppled kingdoms. When we broke apart, both breathing harder than before, Lorenzo rested his forehead against mine in the gesture that had become our private language of intimacy. "Ready to meet the family?" he asked. I thought about terrified nurses and archaeology students, about mothers with dementia and loyal lieutenants who'd become brothers, about the vast network of people who depended on the choices Lorenzo and I made together. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it completely. Outside the windows, Boston glittered in the setting sun, a city that belonged to us now, held in careful hands that had learned to balance mercy with necessary violence. The woman who'd once run through rain-soaked streets in terror now stood at the center of an empire, protected and cherished, and absolutely lethal when threatened. Isabella Benedetti, Queen of Shadows, Architect of Charity, Keeper of Dangerous Love. I'd never been more myself in my entire life.